All right, everybody, we're here at GenCon 2015. I am joined by Erik Dahlman, lead developer for the Star Wars LCG. How you doing?
Yep, I'm doing all right. I'm still awake at the end of Saturday, so that's a good thing.
Yeah, now, fair warning, this is towards the end of the day on Saturday. It's been a long convention. Erik's been working super hard. What have you been doing this weekend?
I was judging the Star Wars Nationals and the Finals on Thursday and Friday, and then I helped Nate and Danny judge the AGOT Kingslayer 2.0 tournament today.
All right. So, speaking of Nationals, or North American Championship for the Star Wars LCG, you're the lead developer, and you just witnessed some of the best players in the game duking it out over epic rounds of the Star Wars LCG. What's your take on where the game currently sits?
It's actually in a fairly good place, I think. The stats from the top 16 match had a pretty much dead even win ratio between the light and dark sides.
Do you know the numbers?
I think there were 17 light side wins and either 15 or 16 dark side wins. It was pretty much dead 50-50.
So pretty close.
Yeah, it was pretty much dead even the whole way through. The light side won the last couple of games and the last couple of rounds, but that put them back even and then just a little bit ahead. So
sure.
It's actually in a fairly good place where both sides definitely have an even chance of winning a game. So it comes down to who's a good player and sees what they need and is able to capitalize on what they find.
Sure. And I think that's exactly where we want it to be. So there were some big changes that happened in the last month in the game, right? We had an update to the restricted list. So can you talk a little bit about, using the restricted list as a tool, because I think it really opened up the game, but then also what creates a scenario in the design process that ultimately leads to the need for a restricted list?
Well, the restricted list, is generally a tool used when there's something that works too well with something else, generally, to try and use that. It's a way to make sure that two things that probably shouldn't be playing together aren't playing together. However, it can also be, used, and I know it's used in the Game of Thrones, first edition sense, to just help drive meta change. If there's things that are being used too often, you can put them on the restricted list and all of a sudden you can't use them all at once, and so you have to go looking for new deck types. So far in the Star Wars game, it's only been used to add stuff in order to break up combinations that have been problematic. The Dash and Freeholders from last year, the Yodas and the Boba Fett and training procedures from this year. But that's not its only function. And so right now, that's all that's been needed. And so, going forward, one hopes never to have to use it, but if stuff gets a little bit too stagnant, it's always a nice tool to have just to be able to help shake things up.
Sure. I was going to say, what's your philosophy on the restricted list? Is it a only use when necessary kind of tool?
It is a mostly use when necessary kind of tool. Originally, when Thrones introduced it, there was a lot of stuff that was put on there that was just showing up in every deck. And so it was here's one way that we can use to make sure that decks people are seeing have a reasonable amount of variety, make people go look for new solutions to problems instead of just being able to rely on the same set of cards all the time.
Sure.
And so, and then after the fact, things go on or off of it as necessary. Sometimes the metagame with new cards that have come in gets to a point where certain cards no longer need to be on the list, and so they can come back off.
Sure.
And so, it's a nice tool that allows to help just sort of drive a very fluid and interesting metagame.
Sure. So Star Wars LCG has had a couple periods where they didn't really have much coming out for one reason or another, but we're about to have the conclusion of the Rogue Squadron cycle, which has really opened up the game. But then we're also going to get Imperial Entanglements, which we've seen this weekend as an early preview, a limited number of copies going out. How do you feel about how Imperial Entanglements is going to affect the game?
It should change things quite a bit. For a while, Navy has generally been seen as, I need a couple of Navy sets maybe to support one of the other factions.
Sure.
More recently, it's come a little bit more into its own with some of the pilot stuff from Rogue Squadron combining with Boba Fett and Zizor. There was several versions of the Boba Fett, Darth Vader, Baron Fell deck running around on Thursday and Friday. And a couple of those did very, very well.
Yeah, it's real.
There was at least 2 or 3 of them in the top 16. And so, it's, Navy, as I said, has been mostly seen as I'll use these to support some other faction's idea. This box definitely gives them a lot of tools to just create their own deck that they are the main stars of and will definitely use to hunt things down and blow them away. The smugglers have They don't maybe have quite as directed sets. Their sets are a lot trickier. They're a little bit harder to figure out, but they are
like true smugglers.
They are tremendously effective once you find the place where they're supposed to go.
Yeah. Like, I mean, even I saw the Chewbacca objective set, and on the surface, it feels like it's not quite doing the same thing the first version of Chewbacca did.
It certainly has a different take on Chewbacca, yeah.
Absolutely, and the card in that, like the one where you can pay 1, I think, is destroy a Wookiee, deal damage twice the remaining health, right?
Yep.
That's the kind of card that just changes the game.
Yes.
Like from a fundamental, it's just like, oh, you played Vader, I'm gonna nuke him.
Yes.
Out of like what? That's crazy. All right.
These are dangerous. I'd be frightened of them.
Yeah, they will tear your arms out. So your anticipation is that the box comes out, it gives Navy some important tools, it gives smugglers some interesting options.
Yes.
And it should help to just keep expanding the game, right?
Absolutely, I think so.
Yeah, and so following that, you guys have also announced the indoor cycle.
Yep.
And a new cycle, new cards, that's all cool. A new Han Solo, whatever. But you also announced mission cards, right? The missions, is that what they're called?
Yep, missions.
So can you tell me what those are and really where that came from?
All right, so missions they're laid out like an objective card. They function a lot like objective cards. They go into your command deck, however.
Okay, so they go into your deck.
They go into your deck rather than into your objective deck.
Yeah.
And so at some point you might draw them. You'll be able to play them onto your opponent's side of the board as an objective that they control, which allows you an option to engage that. So the objectives, which are sort of one of the linchpins of the objective set design system, have always been something that gives you a bonus.
Yeah.
Or improves your own deck's performance usually. Sometimes it does that by hampering your opponent, but for the most part, the objective is something that I get a bonus from, that my opponents, when they engage them, are doing so because they want to get rid of that bonus that I'm getting.
Yeah.
Missions give me a sort of proactive way of going after missions. It's I want to go after objectives. Like I want to go after this in order to get a benefit for myself, rather than just to deny my opponent a benefit of theirs.
Sure. So basically, you play an objective on your opponent's side of the board.
Yep.
And then when you destroy it,
after it is destroyed, it goes to your victory pile. And when it's in your victory pile, it says after you've completed this mission, which is when they go to your victory pile, it gives you some benefit.
Usually some pretty crazy benefit.
Some of them can be pretty crazy.
Yeah, and they count as an objective too.
They count as an objective destroyed for all other purposes, yeah.
That's pretty wild.
They are very interesting.
So what and maybe you can't say this, but where does that come, like where did that idea come from?
It was pretty much this idea of just like, well, objective, so far the main attack defense cycle in the game, which is one of the core conflicts in the game, was always about denying my opponent a benefit, rather than going to get my own benefit, something that I wanted to do.
I'm going to complete this objective.
Right, I'm going to complete this
I'm
mission.
I'm going to get a thing.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a super cool idea. I'm so excited to see that design space explored, right? Because we've seen pilots and we saw the focus on the force struggle and we saw the Hoth mechanic.
Yep.
But this is really just an entirely new card type.
Yes.
Like, which is the first
time.
It's
the game's first new card type.
Yeah, which is really cool. All right. So when it comes to choosing a cycle, or not choosing a cycle, but building a cycle and choosing a card type to go with it and whatnot, or a theme in the edge cards, what's the process like of choosing all of that?
It's not necessarily set. I mean, Star Wars has a lot of interesting locales to explore.
You could say that.
And a lot of different themes. And so, especially, we have the main trilogy of movies that's set in the time period that the card game takes place. And so exploring those locations and the things that happen in those is one of the main options. So we have the Hoth cycle, we have something focused around Endor. The Force is always, has been a core mechanic of, just the Star Wars universe.
Period.
So exploring that and how it, how we've represented it in the game was part of that cycle. And then, pilots, there are a lot of space battles, and, the
kind of important.
They're kind of important. So a lot of times it's looking for just a really cool or interesting idea that's either touched on or is a main cornerstone in the series itself, and taking that, fleshing it out, finding, with the pilot mechanic, finding a way to make characters that, feel like their lore shows them to be behind the stick of a ship.
Yeah.
So, DS61-3's codename was Backstabber, so he comes in and he shoots something, and Hobby...
Super cool.
Yeah. Hobby's lore was that he crashed a whole bunch, and so he keeps getting bailed out and coming back
crashing.
To your hand.
Yeah.
Boba Fett was, about the galaxy's best bounty hunter and a really good pilot, so he captures your stuff and carries it off.
Out of stuff, right?
Vader was the best pilot in the galaxy. He basically negates anyone else's advantages because they just cannot compete with his skill. So finding these ways to take that bit of information and turn it into a card.
Yeah.
So any new stuff going forward, find another aspect that's interesting in the Star Wars universe and try and explore those.
Sure. So you've obviously, like, this whole objective set system is very novel. It's something we haven't seen in a game before. And what would you say, have you had any perspective changes or serious knowledge gained in just the making and design and development and balance of objective sets since the beginning? And like, what are some of those insights that you've learned since the beginning?
It's just mostly finding ways to make sure that the cards within each set complement each other very well, or at least enhance, work towards or enhance whatever theme that set is trying to take. So, just sort of improving the internal synergies in the sets, and or potentially giving them a couple of external synergies where they'll work with something else from that faction or from a different faction in a particular way.
Sure.
And so it's just trying to find a way to make sure that everything, since you need to take all 6 cards, finding a way to make sure that while some of the cards might be on the more common end of the scale rather than the rare end of the scale, to use a CCG term type terminology, is making sure that the cards still fulfill a role within the deck and actually, and provide something for you.
Yeah. All right, so next question is, this for you, Dennis. Do you have any idea when we're going to see the first World Champion card?
Yes. They have been designed. I can't tell you really any much more than that.
Are you excited about it?
Yep, they're both really awesome designs. I'm really happy with them.
So both the World Champion cards
both of them are upcoming. I unfortunately cannot tell you anything more than that, but they are in the works. So.
I'm excited to see them. All right, so as a final question, looking out in the future, you have the indoor cycle, you have Imperial Entanglements, you have the World Champion cards, you have more cards after that, I presume. Mm-hmm. You have new Star Wars movies. What in the future of the Star Wars card game are you most excited and looking forward to?
That's
a tough question.
That's a really tough question. Just being able to find more, either more things in the Star Wars universe. I have a reasonable amount of background knowledge of just the Star Wars universe as it existed, as it exists, and finding ways to take the things that I like from the universe, bring them in, find the things that other people like in the universe, bring those in, find new stuff that I didn't know about before, make sure to show off all that exists in this universe that has a lot of fun stuff to play with.
Sure. Well, Eric, thank you so much for sitting down with me.
Thank you very much for having me, guys.
Thanks for continuing to make Star Wars LCG. We'll be back with more video coverage from GenCon 2015. Catch you guys on the next video.